The fall of the Galactic Sentinel. The vast expanse of space stretched before Commander Zara K, a panorama of darkness punctuated by distant starlight. Her six-fingered hands, once steady at the controls of the most advanced warship in the Salandrian Confederation, now trembled with an unfamiliar sensation, vulnerability. Just weeks ago, she had been the epitome of military excellence. Her tactical brilliance had saved entire star systems, her strategic mind had prevented countless conflicts, and her reputation was etched into the collective memory of multiple alien civilizations. The Salandrian Confederation had regarded her as an indestructible sentinel, a guardian who would always emerge victorious. But victory, she was learning, was a fickle companion. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula had changed everything. What began as a routine defensive operation against the marauding Krell had devolved into a nightmare of betrayal and strategic collapse. Her own allied races, whom she had fought alongside for decades, had systematically abandoned her during the most critical moment of the engagement. As her damaged scout ship drifted through an uncharted sector, Zara K reflected on the brutality of galactic politics. The Confederation she had served so devotedly viewed strength as the ultimate currency, and she had suddenly become a depreciating asset. Her injuries, sustained while covering the retreat of her so-called allies, were seen not as a testament to her sacrifice, but as a liability. Her crystalline exoskeleton, usually a brilliant azure that reflected her rank and achievements, was now cracked and dulled. Diagnostic systems flickered weakly, indicating multiple critical failures. Life support was operating at minimal capacity, and her navigational arrays were barely functional. Probability of survival, 12.3%, a robotic voice announced from her ship's computer. Zara K would have laughed if breathing wasn't so painful. 12%. Those were better odds than she'd expected. The ship's emergency beacon pulsed intermittently, a futile cry for help in the infinite silence. No rescue would come. Not from the Vornax traders who she had once negotiated crucial trade routes with. Not from the Quantum Collective who owed their very existence to her diplomatic interventions. Certainly not from the military command that had orchestrated her abandonment. Hours blended into an indistinguishable haze of pain and resignation. Her mind drifted between memories of past victories and the cold reality of her current predicament. The universe, she was learning, did not care about past glory. It was during one of these semi-conscious moments that something unexpected occurred. A heat signature. Approaching vessels. But these weren't the angular, menacing designs of her known galactic neighbors. These energy profiles were different. Irregular. Almost chaotic in their configuration. Human vessels. The last species she would have expected to encounter in this remote sector. Humans were considered novices in interstellar travel, barely more than curiosities in the grand tapestry of galactic civilization. Most advanced races viewed them as primitive, emotional, lacking the cold calculation required for true space exploration. As the vessels drew closer, Zara K prepared herself. If these were to be her final moments, she would face them with the dignity befitting a Salandrian commander. No begging. No displays of weakness. The human ships moved with an unexpected grace, their approach careful and deliberate. Not the reckless charge of an aggressive species, but the measured movement of beings who understood the delicate nature of space rescue. Communication signals began to pulse. Not the structured, mathematically precise transmissions she was accustomed to, but something more, nuanced. Layers of meaning, emotional undertones that transcended pure data. First contact was imminent. And Commander Zara K, the fallen sentinel of a civilization that had discarded her, was about to discover that everything she understood about strength, survival, and cooperation was about to be fundamentally challenged. The universe, it seemed, had one more lesson to teach her. Survival and reflection. The first thing Zara K noticed was the warmth. Not the harsh, artificial temperature regulation of her Salandrian medical bays, but a different kind of warmth. Organic. Alive. Her eyes, still adjusting to consciousness, took in an environment completely foreign to her experiences. Soft lighting. Curved surfaces that seemed almost, grown rather than constructed. Medical equipment that looked both primitive and ingeniously adapted. A human stood nearby, checking what appeared to be a makeshift monitoring system. The being, a female, Zarake remembered from her xenobiology training, moved with a combination of precision and fluidity that defied the clumsy descriptions in her previous mission reports. "You're awake," the human said. Not a question. A statement delivered with a calm that bordered on remarkable. Zarake's communication implant struggled to process the nuance. Humans communicated so differently from her own species. Every tone, every subtle shift in vocal modulation carried layers of meaning. Why? The single word was all she could manage. Why save me? Why invest resources in a potentially hostile alien? Why show any concern? The human, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, her name tag read, simply smiled. It was not the predatory grin of a conqueror, nor the calculated gesture of a diplomatic exchange. It was genuine. Warm. "Because that's what we do," she responded, checking some readings on a nearby screen. Zarake's cultural database struggled to compute such a simplistic response. In her civilization, every action had a precise strategic value. Rescue missions were calculated risk assessments. Resources were allocated based on potential return on investment. But humans? They seemed to operate on an entirely different paradigm. Her medical recovery became a study in contradiction. The human medical team used technology that would be considered laughably rudimentary by Salandrian standards. Handheld devices. Manual diagnostics. Techniques that relied more on observation and intuition than pure technological intervention. Yet they were effective. Dr. Rodriguez explained her injuries in detail. A fractured exoskeletal matrix. Compromised neural transmission pathways. Cellular damage from prolonged exposure to radiation and extreme stress. Each explanation was delivered with a mixture of scientific precision and genuine concern. "Your species has remarkable regenerative capabilities," she would often say, more in wonder than clinical assessment. Zarake learned that this human crew was part of an exploratory mission. Not a military expedition. Not a colonization effort. Simply, exploration. The concept was alien to her. Resources expended without a clear, immediate strategic objective. During her recovery, she overheard conversations. The crew discussed their mission, their hopes, their personal histories. A level of transparency that would be considered a critical security breach in Salandrian protocol. Lieutenant Marcus Chen spoke about leaving his family to explore unknown sectors. Not for conquest. Not for resource extraction. But for knowledge. For understanding. Engineer Sarah Okonkwo discussed technological challenges with an enthusiasm that seemed more emotional than logical. Her eyes lit up not at the prospect of military advantage, but at the pure joy of problem solving. These humans did not see the universe as a battlefield to be conquered, but as a mystery to be understood. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Zarake's perspective began to shift. Her civilization had taught her that weakness was to be eliminated. That compassion was a strategic liability. That only the strongest survived. But these humans? They seemed to draw strength from something entirely different. Not from individual power, but from collective resilience. Not from eliminating weakness, but from supporting it. As days passed and her recovery continued, Zarake realized something profound was happening. She was not just healing physically. Something deeper was transforming. The universe, she was beginning to understand, was far more complex than her previous comprehension. And humans? They were nothing like the reports had suggested. They were something else entirely. The turning point. The first indication of trouble came through an encrypted burst transmission that made the human ship's communication systems crackle with unexpected intensity. Zara K, now partially recovered, recognized the signature immediately: Kreltheri pursuit patterns. Her former allies might have abandoned her, but the enemy had not forgotten. "They're tracking us," Zara K stated, her voice a mixture of professional assessment and growing respect for the human crew's potential response. Captain James Reyes studied the incoming data with a calm that would have been impossible in a Salandrian command structure. No panic. No immediate calls for aggressive action. Just calculated observation. "We've got options," he said simply, turning to his diverse crew. Each member, representing different backgrounds, specialties, and perspectives, began to contribute. Lieutenant Chen analyzed the pursuit vectors. Dr. Rodriguez cross-referenced potential defensive strategies. Engineer Okonkwo was already modifying the ship's minimal defensive systems, transforming what should have been limited resources into something far more adaptive. Zara K watched, fascinated. In her previous life, such a scenario would have resulted in immediate military protocol. Rigid, hierarchical decision-making. Clear chains of command with minimal individual input. These humans. They were different. The Kreltheri, Zara K explained, do not negotiate. They pursue total elimination. Your ship's current configuration is substantially weaker than their standard assault vessels. Captain Reyes raised an eyebrow. Weaker doesn't mean defeated. The preparation was nothing like Zara K had ever witnessed. No standardized battle formations. No rigid tactical algorithms. Instead, the crew moved with an organic synchronicity that defied traditional military logic. They were improvising. The Kreltheri ships emerged from quantum slipstream exactly as Zara K predicted, 3 vessels, configured for total annihilation. Their weapon signatures were designed to leave no survivors, no traces. What happened next would forever change Zara K's understanding of warfare. The human ship didn't attempt traditional evasion. Instead, it did something utterly unexpected. They used the asteroid field surrounding them not as an obstacle, but as a tactical environment. Lieutenant Chen's navigation was less about avoiding asteroids and more about transforming them into active defensive elements. Each minor course correction became a potential weapon. Each gravitational calculation a shield. The Kreltheri, expecting a straightforward engagement, found themselves confronted with an entirely unpredictable combat approach. "We're not trying to win by their rules," Captain Reyes explained to Zara K. "We're changing the entire concept of the game. Improvised electromagnetic pulses. Carefully timed gravitational slingshots. Communication jamming techniques that seemed more like creative hacking than traditional warfare." The human ship wasn't just surviving. It was fundamentally disrupting the Kreltheri's entire combat methodology. Zara K watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just survival. This was something more profound. A demonstration that strength wasn't about superior firepower, but adaptive thinking. About understanding systems so deeply that you could fundamentally alter their operational parameters. Humans didn't just fight. They problem-solved. When the engagement concluded, 2 Kreltheri vessels were permanently disabled. The third retreated, something virtually unheard of in their military doctrine. No lives lost on the human ship. Minimal resources expended. That, Captain Reyes said with a slight smile, is how we do things. Zara K realized her entire understanding of conflict, of survival, of potential was being systematically dismantled and reconstructed. These humans were not just survivors. They were transformative. And her journey with them was just beginning. Redemption and transformation. The aftermath of the Kreltheri encounter brought something Zara K had never experienced: collaboration beyond strategic necessity. Instead of debriefings filled with cold analysis, the human crew processed their recent battle through conversations that seemed more like shared storytelling. They didn't just review tactics, they reflected on the emotional journey of survival. Dr. Rodriguez noticed Zaraka's confusion. "We process differently," she explained. "For us, every challenge is both a technical problem and a human experience." Zaraka's rehabilitation continued, but now it was more than physical recovery. The humans were teaching her something fundamental about existence, that survival was not just about overcoming external challenges, but understanding oneself in the process. Lieutenant Chen introduced her to what humans called cultural exchange, sharing stories, traditions, personal histories. To Zaraka, this seemed inefficient. In her previous life, such interactions would have been deemed unnecessary communication noise. But here, these exchanges became a form of collective intelligence. The ship's engineer, Sarah Okonkwo, showed Zaraka how they repaired their systems. Not with pristine, standardized replacement parts, but through creative adaptation. A damaged communication array was rebuilt using components never originally intended for such a purpose. "Improvisation is our greatest technology," Okonkwo would say, her hands moving with a craftsman's precision. Captain Reyes recognized something deeper was happening. Zaraka wasn't just a rescued alien anymore. She was becoming something more, a bridge between understanding. When the first transmission came from the Salandrian Confederation, it was not what anyone expected. Their message was direct: Zaraka was to be considered a strategic asset to be recovered. Not for rescue. For interrogation. Potentially elimination. The human crew's response was unanimous, though expressed in different ways. "Not happening," Captain Reyes stated simply. Dr. Rodriguez analyzed the transmission's underlying psychological implications. Lieutenant Chen began developing communication countermeasures. Okonkwo was already modifying the ship's defensive capabilities. Zaraka realized they were preparing to protect her. Not because of any strategic advantage. Simply because it was the right thing to do. "My people will not understand this," she told Captain Reyes. "Protecting an individual at potential collective risk goes against every principle of my civilization." Reyes smiled. "That's the point. We're not about principles that limit us. We're about principles that expand our understanding." The conflict brewing was more than a potential military engagement. It was a fundamental clash of philosophical approaches to existence. The Salandrian Confederation represented a model of survival through calculated elimination of potential threats. Humans represented something else entirely, a model of survival through adaptation, understanding, and collective resilience. As the ship prepared for what could become a defining moment, Zaraka understood she was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in a profound transformation. Her identity was shifting. No longer just a commander from a fallen civilization, but something more fluid. More complex. "We don't just survive," Captain Reyes had told her earlier. "We evolve." And in that moment, watching her human companions prepare for a challenge that would test everything they believed, Zaraka realized the most revolutionary act was not resistance. It was understanding. The real battle was just beginning. A new alliance. The confrontation, when it came, was nothing like traditional warfare. The Salandrian Confederation's recovery fleet approached with the precision of a surgical strike. Massive ships designed for total elimination, their weapon signatures promising nothing short of complete destruction. But they encountered something entirely unexpected. Instead of a conventional defensive posture, the human ship transformed the entire engagement into a complex diplomatic chess match. Captain Reyes and Zaraka worked in a synchronicity that defied their radically different backgrounds. Communication became their primary weapon. Lieutenant Chen intercepted and decoded Salandrian transmission protocols with a creativity that bordered on artistry. Each encrypted message was not just decoded but reinterpreted, revealing layers of communication the Salandrians never anticipated could be exposed. Dr. Rodriguez analyzed the psychological profile of the Confederation's command structure. Not to exploit, but to understand. To find a pathway to communication that didn't rely on threat or dominance. They're afraid, she observed. Not of us. Of what we represent. Zarake understood now. Her former civilization operated on a model of control through fear. Humans operated on something far more complex, understanding through connection. The recovery fleet's approach became a demonstration of this fundamental difference. Where the Salandrians expected a military response, they found a multidimensional dialogue. Technological disruption mixed with diplomatic nuance. Strategic positioning that was more about creating understanding than establishing dominance. Engineer Okonkwo's modifications to their ship were masterful. Defense systems that could neutralize threats without destruction. Communication arrays that could penetrate the most secure transmission barriers. Not through brute force, but through intelligent adaptation. Zarake realized she was witnessing something revolutionary. This wasn't just a battle. It was a conversation. A negotiation of fundamental understanding. The turning point came unexpectedly. A single transmission that laid bare the true nature of human approach to conflict. "We don't want to defeat you," Captain Reyes communicated. "We want to understand you." It was a concept so foreign to the Salandrian Confederation that it momentarily paralyzed their strategic algorithms. Understanding was a weapon more powerful than any quantum torpedo. As the confrontation reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. The Salandrian fleet, prepared for total elimination, found themselves engaged in a dialogue they never anticipated. Not surrender. Not conquest. But mutual comprehension. Zarake, once a commander of a civilization built on hierarchical control, now stood as a bridge between two fundamentally different approaches to existence. Strength, she had learned from her human companions, is not about eliminating difference. It's about embracing it. The final resolution was not a victory in traditional terms. It was a transformation. The Salandrian Confederation would never be the same. Nor would Zarake. As the ship settled into a complex dance of potential cooperation, Captain Reyes turned to Zarake with a smile that spoke volumes. "Ready for the next adventure?" he asked. And for the first time in her existence, Zarake understood that the greatest journey was not about destination. It was about the willingness to keep moving. To keep learning. To keep understanding. Humanity's true strength was not in its technology. It was in its infinite capacity for hope.